I'd like to talk about the transformation of consciousness. And by that I mean the natural process going on within each person. So I see the whole movement of the human species through time as a process of transformation. And I think the transformation is really the dynamics of culture or cultural change, so that it's spread from a very local tribal situation to a global situation. And we're on the brink, I think, of colonizing other planets in the solar system or beyond the solar system within the next few hundred years possibly. My general view or awareness is that whatever you might say is the bigger picture behind the human species, in other words, how the human species came into being, whether it's, as some feel, from the process of evolution, or as I feel, coming from another dimension, a psycho-spiritual dimension, so that what we call consciousness is an aspect of the psyche that somehow works in conjunction, or as Carl Jung said, works in synchronicity with the brain body, so that the psyche is quite independent, but actually interfaces with the body through consciousness. So we're conscious while we're awake in the body, and we're also conscious when we go into a dream state. I think the dream itself is transformative, because when you enter a dream, there's not necessarily a beginning and an end. It's like a section out of a drama. And I think that's how we actually live. I think we live in our consciousness, not in a cause and effect, in the sense of in time, where you've got past, present and future. But I think in actual fact, the living human being is living in a dynamic transformation of cultural consciousness. So I don't think literally we actually live in time. I think time is involved from day to day, and we plan different things in our life. But I think essentially the drama that we're living within and without is not like a book with a beginning and an end. I mean, we're born and we die, but I think the conditioning process of consciousness and the world is a living drama. So it's like almost as if the first human beings, if you think of, say, the Aboriginal and their concept of dreamtime, and what they say is there's the Alkaringa, which was the golden age of their ancestors, who more or less incarnated as mythical beings. So what they're saying is that we came from another dimension, or we came from the sky or the stars as it were, and came into an animal body in a sort of dream consciousness. So you could say that the first Homo sapiens were dreaming at night, and when they woke up in the morning, that kind of, you might say, drama spilled over into consciousness, as it were, or went from the dream conscious state to the waking conscious state, and the sense of the world around them was like a dream, like a vision. So they saw the actual physical universe as an animal would, but there was a kind of overlay of a visionary imagination, you might say. And then we could say that that became what we call language. And then language would be knowledge, and knowledge would be culture. So what I'm actually saying is that archetypally, if you like, the projection of the symbols and myth within the dream came into the waking state within the body brain, as it were, but not actually directly connecting with the brain in an obvious way. So thought, you might say, which is the substance of the dream, didn't actually directly, it wasn't reducible to the brain, but there was some kind of electrical, as it were, connection. And so the first beings were living a kind of symbolic myth. So that means that in the dream there was a symbolic language, a mythic language projected by the archetype. So the archetype, you could say, is objective to both psyche and body in what Jung called the psychoid, or the collective unconscious, but which I would refer to as an extension of the spiritual dimension. So I see the archetypes as spiritual perceptions in a way. But anyway, so you might say the first language was mythic and symbolic, and each person was like living that in the dream time. And then, however, language came about through images and words and numbers, and then we began to ritualize the world around us, as it were, in terms of cultural expression. Now, if the archetype projects a kind of ordered intelligence, and that ordered intelligence manifests inwardly and outwardly psychophysically, then you could say in its initial state it's an integrated whole. So within the archetypal realm, the spiritual realm, it's an integrated whole, which in say, Tibetan Buddhism would be represented by the mandala, which is a square with a circle in the centre, or a square with a circle enclosing the square. So the circle is often related to the heavens, the spheres of the heavens, and the square is related to the earth square, the four cardinal points. So the square would be integration of the totality of you might say, our experience and our knowledge, and the circle is more like the perfection, the whole. So there's a kind of completion, an integration of the totality, and then there's a perfection of the whole. So the earth is made holy, it's made into a paradise, as it were. And the earth, the square and the circle of the earth would again be a mandala. And that's also expressed in the pyramid complex at Saqqara, the first pyramid that was built, the step pyramid, by Imhotep, whom I see as thrice great Thoth, or Hermes Trismegistus, the founder of the Hermetic art. And so you have a white wall enclosure, a circular white wall enclosure, and then the pyramid with the 4 cardinal points at the base. So you could say that what we call language, images, words and numbers, constitute the expression of the symbol. So if you think of the symbol as a cube, and the cube is a symbol of integration, then when it expresses itself, it becomes fragmented into language and knowledge. And the idea is, in any field of knowledge, any system of knowledge, you have to learn to create order, to integrate whatever it is you need to integrate. So if you're in a relationship and there's a difference in feeling or understanding or language and consciousness and body, the whole thing, then you have to learn to understand, to bring together what's divided within the two people. So you go from a state of duality into unity, which is a coming together of the, you might say, the masculine and feminine, and then you make the next step to oneness. So the two people that were divided and made into a unity can then have a relationship, one-to-one relationship. And the oneness is symbolic of the self, and the self is symbolic of the spirit. So the self in the one mind, spiritually speaking, archetypally speaking, would actually be perfection, would be the circle of eternity, or the golden ring of the solar disk. So you have the spirit, which is the circle, perfection, eternity, oneness. The psyche is unity. So in the dream, everything's unified. It's a kind of, like a film or a book, it's a kind of sense of unity. It's all woven together. And the nature of thought, if you think of thought, which produces thought forms, or images and pictures and visions and dreams, then thought itself would be a kind of unified substance, like a fluid substance. So the psyche is often referred to as water. And then you've got the earth square, you've got the earth, the water, and the water. So what you're looking for in a dream, like reading between the lines, divining, intuiting between the lines, the kind of inner, deeper meaning in the psyche, what you're looking for is the symbol. So you could say that the symbol is interwoven in the dream, and by extension interwoven in the various systems of knowledge. in cultural expression. So everything going on in consciousness as a whole, inwardly and outwardly, is a projection of the archetype which creates order by producing symbols that are forms of integration. So we often think of thinking, the intellect, as fragmentation, and the heart and feeling as a sense of unity. So you have the emotional intelligence and the intellectual intelligence. And the as above, so below, they meet in the midbrain, in the thalamus, the bedchamber, so that there's a mystical marriage between the feminine and the masculine. And that's actually that was actually known to the ancient world, and in modern science they actually do say that the junction of the intellectual and emotional intelligences actually do come together in the thalamus. So you could say in the modern world the predominance of technocracy, which is a kind of intellectual pursuit, is overriding religion, which is more feminine, more intuitive, and the heart and love. And in Europe especially, but spreading throughout the world, religion is becoming more and more marginalised, so that there isn't the integration of the feminine and the masculine. Although in the late 20th century there's a lot of movements to bring the feminine more into the picture, but it's still very much a masculine world. And you could say the New Age spirituality is probably quite feminine, and Carl Jung has influenced the New Age thinking, and he very much was studying the feminine. That was one of his main things, to understand the feminine aspect of the Godhead, because you've got the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit is more the feminine, the soul. And you could say that the psyche itself, which produces thought and consciousness and dream and vision and culture, it does represent the feminine as a kind of unitative factor, whereas the physical body, the brain, the intellect, the fragmented physical universe based on duality is very much a masculine world. So you have a very masculine figure, very evangelical figure in Richard Dawkins, Oxford University, who's an evolutionist, believes in scientism, atheism, and he wrote a book called The God Delusion, inferring that people that had anything to do with religion and spirituality and magic, the New Age, etc., that they are actually deluded. And of course delusion is related to a mental disorder. So people like him are actually looking at people interested in psycho-spiritual things, which would include Aboriginal, Native American Indian, vast swathes of billions of people across the world. And he's more or less saying that they're not thinking straight. There's something wrong with their genetic structure, as it were. So you've got the idea of a God gene. So it's quite serious in the sense of what people like him might implicate or implement in the future in terms of genetic engineering, and also prejudice against religion, and what will happen to those people in a future society that maybe might even become more fascistic and totalitarian. So I see the human being in terms of cultural expression in a movement of transformation. And as I say, from the very beginning, when we started to dream, as it were, and then express culture in language, I think that, as I say, the inward dream would be more coherent, and the outer dreaming, the outer thinking, the outer expression of consciousness in the world, in culture, would be more fragmented. And you might say from the very beginning there was a state of uncertainty, there was a state of confusion and chaos, in the sense that what were we to think about? How were we to express language? You know, what is language? What is language expressing? What's the purpose of the human being? What's the purpose of culture? Why are we here on this planet? What part do we play in reality, in the universe? And when we go, when the body sleeps and we go out of our body, as it were, into the dream, into the astral dimensions, and or possibly the spiritual dimensions, then what does all that have to do with living between birth and death? What are we supposed to do? And of course that's still a living problem, because we're still in transformation. You can ask a question and try to answer the question, but I would say you're born with a question and you die with a question. The species emerge with a question and will die with a question, because it's always transformative. I mean, if you take a writer, they write one book, then another book and another book. So like Marcel Proust in the late 19th century, I mean, he kept a record of his reflections about the workings of his consciousness in relationship to living in Paris. And so he blended the kind of psychology and society into a cultural expression, and there was no sense of time, as I was saying earlier. You know, I don't think we live in time. In our consciousness, we're not actually in time. You know, you say dream time, but dream time's like a fluid thought that doesn't have a beginning and an end. And the whole point is to learn to integrate the various fragments of meaning, fragments of words, fragments of feeling, fragments of music, fragments of relationship. So Marcel Proust wrote in a style what is called the stream of consciousness. So for about 50 years, from the late 19th century through Picasso and the Dada and Surrealism and the writings of T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland, the poet, all of that's like a stream of consciousness. So they were recognizing at that particular time that consciousness was a stream of transformation, and you couldn't locate, you can't locate yourself, as it were, as a fixed point. You can't say it begins and ends here. You know, yes, you wake up in the morning, you go to bed at night, but right until the last moment at night, you're making choices. So you wake up making choices, and those choices can be habitual, like you go in the kitchen and make a cup of tea, as it were, but other things like talking to people, how you feel about the world around you, what might happen when you're walking down the street, what the existentialists call the contingencies of life. So it's like someone throwing some dice, and then you see what numbers you've got. You get direction, indications of what to do. So it's the element of chance that seems to play out in the world. And Carl Jung developed the idea of synchronicity. So his idea of synchronicity would be that the archetype, which produces order, and that order expresses itself in symbolic form, and that symbolic form is expressed in language and culture and knowledge, and you have to take the pieces and put them together, like when you listen to music. Although the music is a complete piece of music, the individual has to listen and, in a sense, recompose it in their own mind according to how they feel and think about it, how they intuit it. So it's always a relationship which involves a level of transformation and creativity and integration. So synchronicity is projected by the archetype from the spiritual dimension, and it appears in the psychic realm and in the physical realm. So you can have a dream of, say, a black cat, say, walking down a particular path, and then the next day you're going somewhere and you walk down this path and there's a black cat, and then you realise that it could be a synchronicity. Now, the black cat would be a form of symbol, so you've got appearing in the synchronicity is a symbol of the black cat. Now, in isolation, you could look up the meaning of the black cat in various books, but the black cat might be related to something else and something else. So through your life, you might find fragments of a symbol displayed in your life over from the very beginning of your life all the way through your life. Or it could be, you might have 2 or 3 expressions, but maybe you have 10, maybe you have 20. And the point is, in Jungian psychology, is to integrate that, so that, for example, if you go back to Egyptian magic, the cat is represented by the goddess Bast, and Bast is a form of Isis. And the cat, of course, is of the lion family. So the Isis is the lioness, and the lioness gives birth to Horus, and Horus is the solar hero, and he becomes the solar lion king. So anyway, what I'm saying is that most people will live their life and never recognize the symbolic nature of consciousness. And other people, like Jungians, will take it very seriously. And probably most people in the New Age have some idea of what a symbol is, and certainly what synchronicity is. So, imagine the human drama from the dawning of of the species, going on into the future to the possible end of the human species, when we might transform into something completely different. We might the human species as we know it may come to an end, and then something else happens. But if you think of the whole